Welcome back to Sneak Peek Week. This is episode 2 in my special mini-series where I'm giving you a behind-the-scenes look at the Obesity Medicine Nutrition course and the expert speakers inside. If you've been burned out by playing advice-ping-pong with your patients, you give a tip, get an excuse, and back and forth you go, then you're going to love today's episode. You're about to hear from Laura Kohler, a registered dietitian who I've labeled as the behavior change queen. She shares practical evidence-based ways to help patients move from advice to action. Her strategies are simple, powerful, and honestly, kind of a relief. Now, don't forget, my podcast listeners get 15% off the full course with code POD15 at examroomnutrition.com/course. All right, let's meet Laura. She's a registered dietitian, and the module in which she spoke on is titled From Advice to Action, Evidence-Based Strategies to Help Patients Change. And so, Laura, I would love if you could just tell us what are a few key takeaways that clinicians will learn from your presentation.
Well, thank you, Colleen. I'm so excited to be part of this event, and I am also excited to talk with all of your audience about behavior change and how that can impact patients and their success. So in terms of 3 of the main takeaways that you can take from my presentation, first of all, as clinicians, we need to move beyond the idea that information is the same thing as success. You cannot just give somebody a handout and expect them to change. Instead, it's really helpful to actually understand the barriers that are preventing them from taking action so you can actually help them to develop a plan that's effective and practical and sustainable for that person who's sitting right in front of you. The second thing is that we can focus on identity and behavior and not specifically outcomes. So instead of a goal like lose 10 pounds, we can help someone build an identity that I'm a healthy and active person. So instead of success being about what they weigh, it's about who they are and what they're capable of doing. How empowering is that, right? So when their actions are actually aligned with who they want to be, then the motivation is intrinsic and it can be so powerful for them too. And the last thing is you can make it easy for people to succeed, right? You can help them focus on 1 or 2 very small and sustainable behaviors and choose a specific time when they're going to actually insert those behaviors into their life. So an example might be when I pour my morning coffee, I'm going to take my medication. And that removes the guesswork from actually doing what it is that they need to do. And it can really help them to automate new habits.
I love how practical your presentation was. And not only do you make it easy for the clients or for the patients, but you also make it easy for the clinicians because it can get really overwhelming when you are trying to guide your patient towards their goal, whatever health goal that might be. It can feel really overwhelming. So your talk just simplifies all of that in such a brilliant way. Now, if you could summarize your presentation in 1 sentence, what would you say?
I would say that you can stop educating patients and start helping them to activate change. And you can do that with specific and evidence-based tools that allow you to actively partner with your patients in order to help them facilitate change.
So beautiful. You are the behavior change queen. And so I would love to know what your favorite question is to ask patients that maybe has been the most impactful in their journey towards behavior change.
Well, I think you know this one because I think I shared this with you a long time ago and I have heard you using it again and again. And it's just because it's so powerful, right? So I found that the most impactful question that I can ask to any patient is, what is making this so hard for you? Because what we need to do is not think about what it is that they're actually supposed to do and keep giving them more lists of things that they're supposed to be performing on. It's a question of figuring out what is getting in the way, and that can help us to actually direct them to what is going to be the most helpful intervention moving forward, right? It opens the door to having an honest conversation with them, and that answer will tell us exactly where to put our focus so that we can, instead of just continuing to give them more information, we can figure out the real obstacle and work on action steps that are actually going to help them to be successful.
You are so right. I've probably quoted you on LinkedIn multiple times, multiple podcast episodes, because when you told me that a year ago in our first podcast episode, that you ask your patients this, it was like a light bulb moment for me. And I have used it ever since. So that is why I call you the behavior change queen, because it's such a great question. Because again, we can feel stuck just giving more advice, and you kind of play ping pong with your patient of, let me give them this advice. And then they say, oh, well, I can't walk because my knee hurts. And then you're, oh, well, how about you drink more water? And then they say, well, I don't like water. And it just gets so exhausting. And I feel like that is the number one way to burnout as a clinician, is to just continue to give advice and information that is not resonating with the patient. And so I love this question so much, because now you're just putting the patient in the driver's seat and you're asking them, tell me why this is so hard for you. And then, like you said, you just strategize based on that one issue. And then you're not wasting your time giving useless advice that doesn't really target their main concern. So absolutely brilliant. You guys need to be using that question with every patient. And Laura, you actually use this question with your patients in dialysis when it comes to medication. So just because maybe it's not about weight, it can be asked in a variety of ways. So I'd love to hear about other situations or scenarios that you've asked this question that maybe wasn't always about weight loss.
And that's so true. With my patients, we are constantly talking about being consistent with taking medications. We're talking about maybe problems with them actually showing up to their treatments. What is it that's actually getting in the way of you being here? So instead of trying to encourage them to be there, like, you need to work harder to be here, like, maybe they really are working really hard at this and we just don't understand. So it is something that can be so helpful in so many different aspects of care. It's just about actually figuring out, as we've said, that specific thing that's getting in the way of their success, so that you can problem solve and strategize with them instead of just giving them generic advice.
Yeah. And we as the clinician probably couldn't guess what their barrier is. Your example that, like I said, has stuck with me when you talked about medication compliance. And if you didn't ask, hey, why is it so hard for you to be taking your phosphate binders? You wouldn't know that maybe they're having a really hard time with the size of the pill. And you wouldn't have given some ideas or suggestions for alternative, medications. And so I love that question, because you're really getting into the patient's life, because they live, the 23 hours or whatever outside of clinic that we have no idea what's going on. So I think that question is just absolutely brilliant and useful in so many scenarios. Now, because you're the behavior change queen, I would love to hear, what is the biggest lie that we as clinicians believe or have been told about behavior change?
I would say that the biggest lie is this idea of non-compliance. I think that's a word that grates on so many of us, and yet it's something that I still hear and see just in healthcare in general. I think the biggest misconception is that when a patient isn't successful, that the blame lies entirely with the patient. And this is the issue that I see with it. When you label someone as non-compliant, you're essentially shifting the blame over to them and you're shutting down the conversation. It is an easy way out for you, but it's not at all helpful to the patient, and it's not helping move anybody forward. The truth is that as practitioners, we can play a really important role in the behavior change process and our patient's ability to actually achieve a successful outcome. So instead of seeing something as a failure of the patient, I think it's really important to see it as a failure of the plan, right? So it's a cue to be more engaged partner, to get curious and to figure out a different way forward together. Kind of the way that I like to think about it. And I'll be sitting and talking to a patient and I'll kind of feel like it's sort of like I'm holding this ball, like you can call it whatever you want, like a crystal ball or whatever, but that is the problem. So instead of talking at the patient, like they're the person that is the issue and we need to fix them, we can hold it out in front of us and we can look at that together, and then we can problem solve and strategize. It's not a personal thing. It really is just about doing the problem solving and trying to understand what is getting in the way and continuing to be an active partner with the patient in terms of helping them to achieve success.
Yeah. Another thing that you've said previously is for us to assume that the patient wants to be successful. I just absolutely love that, because then we can go into the room, go into the session with the patient without that sense of blame and that sense of like, oh, you're a failure. Like, why aren't you sticking to the plan? But if we just assume that they want to be successful, and again, that something is getting in the way of that, then we can partner with them. And I think that is just such a impactful strategy and mindset to go in when we are counseling patients. So I've just learned so much from you, Laura. Thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge with us in this obesity medicine nutrition course. Laura's presentation truly is the cherry on top of this course. So if you're listening and you're wondering, how do I become a behavior change queen, just like Laura, go to the show notes, or you can go to examroomnutrition.com/course and get registered and start the nutrition course today. And don't forget to use code POD15 at checkout for 15% off. All right, come back tomorrow because you're going to be hearing from Melissa Mitri, a dietitian and weight loss expert who is sharing some smart strategies for managing side effects from anti-obesity medications. All right, see you then.